The day I bought that rusty old storage locker, I wasn't chasing treasure or revenge. I was just trying to survive. My life had shrunk to a one-room apartment, the kind where the ceiling fan rattles louder than your thoughts. I'd been laid off from my warehouse job 2 months earlier, and the only thing heavier than my debts was the silence in my phone. When I walked past that auction yard on the city's east side, I didn't plan to stop. But then I heard the auctioneer shout, "Locker 32, starting bid, 300. Something about the number stuck in my head. Maybe because 300 was exactly what I had left in my account. No savings, no backup, just 3 crumpled bills between me and nothing. The other bidders, mostly regulars, snickered when I raised my hand. They looked like the kind of men who'd been doing this for years. Sunburnt faces, thick gloves, confident smirks. I could feel their eyes on me, measuring my stupidity. "Sold," the auctioneer yelled, slamming his clipboard. Laughter followed. I remember one man leaning toward another and muttering, "Poor kid just bought himself a pile of junk." They weren't wrong. When the lock finally broke off and I lifted the door, a stale, metallic smell spilled out, a mix of rust, damp cardboard, and time. Dust floated in the sunlight like old secrets. The locker wasn't large, maybe 8 feet deep, and every inch looked worthless. Cracked boxes, a broken fan, a stack of yellowed newspapers, and an old trunk half buried under a tarp. Still, it was mine. I spent the rest of the afternoon dragging everything into a borrowed pickup. A part of me hoped I'd find something, anything that could flip my luck. But by sunset, I'd sorted everything into 2 piles, trash and disappointment. The newspapers were from the 1980s, the fan was beyond repair, and most of the boxes held nothing but moldy books and moth-eaten clothes. Then I found the trunk. It was heavier than it looked, its metal hinges stiff with rust. The lock had already been broken, maybe decades ago. Inside were old black-and-white photographs, bundles of letters tied with ribbon, and a small wooden box carved with a symbol I didn't recognize. An intricate circle intersected by 3 lines, like a compass pointing in all directions. I brushed off the dust and opened it. Inside was a folded envelope sealed in wax. My name was written on it. At first I thought it was a prank, maybe a coincidence, someone else with the same name, but the handwriting stopped me cold. It looked familiar, rounded, deliberate, with small curls at the edges of each letter. My mother used to write like that, except my mother had died 10 years ago. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of yellowed paper, the ink slightly faded but perfectly legible. "Son, if you're reading this, it means you found what I left behind. And it also means the truth can no longer stay buried." I read the line 3 times. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The letter went on. "The man you called father was not your blood. I couldn't tell you when you were little. It would have destroyed everything. But there was someone else and he wanted to know you. His name was Richard Hale. He owned Hale Maritime, a shipping company that stretched from New York to Singapore. He built it from nothing, and he made a promise before he died, that one day you would inherit what was rightfully yours." I sat on the concrete floor, staring at the page. Hale Maritime. The name meant nothing to me, but something about it sounded heavy, powerful. I'd grown up thinking my father was a mechanic, an ordinary man who worked himself into an early grave. But now there was this letter, claiming I was connected to a billionaire shipping magnate. It felt absurd, like one of those cheap drama plots you scroll past online. Still, there was more. In the trunk, you'll find a small metal key. It belongs to a safety deposit box at Midtown National Bank. I couldn't risk sending it to you while I was alive. If you decide to open it, be careful. People have been watching that account for years. Some don't want you to find it. But if you do, you'll understand everything. The letter ended with a line that felt like it had been written in another lifetime. Whatever happens, remember, you are not who they said you were. I read that sentence over and over until the ink blurred with my tears. I didn't even know what emotion I was supposed to feel. Shock, anger, confusion. My whole life I'd believed I was the son of an ordinary couple who'd died broke. And now this note was telling me my real father was some global shipping magnate? When I looked back inside the trunk, there it was, a small brass key taped to the bottom. I barely slept that night. I sat on my mattress, the letter unfolded beside me, the key glinting in the weak light from the street lamp outside. Every few minutes I'd convince myself it was a hoax, some elaborate trick by the locker's previous owner. But then I'd look at the handwriting again, that unmistakable curl in the R, and I knew it was her. The next morning, I took a bus downtown. The bank was an old building with marble floors and gold lettering that looked like it hadn't been changed in 50 years. When I told the clerk I was there about a safety deposit box, she asked for the key and an ID. Her expression changed when she compared the name on my ID with the one on her screen. "One moment. Please," she said. A few minutes later, an older manager appeared. He wore a navy suit and a polite, practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mr. Hale?" he asked softly. The name froze me. Yeah, that's me," I managed to say. He nodded slowly, as if he'd been expecting this moment for years. "Right this way." He led me into a private room, where he placed a long steel box on the table. "This was registered 32 years ago," he said. "It was never opened. The owner specified that it could only be accessed by someone with your name and this exact key." He stepped outside, leaving me alone. My hands shook as I turned the key and lifted the lid. Inside were several old documents, a faded passport, and another envelope. This one thicker, sealed with the same wax symbol as before. I opened it. Inside was a single line written in neat, deliberate handwriting. "Your father left you more than money. He left you a choice. The coordinates below will lead you to it." Below that were numbers, longitude and latitude. I didn't even realize I was crying until a tear hit the paper. I had no idea where those coordinates led, but deep down I already knew. Whatever waited, there was the reason my mother had kept this secret buried for so long, and something in my gut told me that finding it wouldn't just change my life. It would rewrite it. I spent the next 2 days staring at those coordinates. Every time I typed them into my phone, the same spot appeared on the map, a small coastal town 3 hours north of the city. No airports, no major roads, just a cluster of houses near the sea and a long stretch of forest beyond it. The name of the place was Clearwater Cove, population just over 500. I'd never heard of it before. I tried telling myself it was a dead end, that the letter was just a fading dream from a woman who'd spent her life trying to protect me from something I still didn't understand. But the more I tried to ignore it, the louder the thought grew. What if it was true? What if there was more to this story than I'd ever been told? By sunrise on the third day, I'd packed a bag, slipped the letter and key into my jacket, and hit the road in my old pickup. The radio didn't work, so the only sound was the hum of the tires and the storm of thoughts in my head. The farther I drove from the city, the quieter everything became. No traffic, no noise, just winding roads and the distant cry of gulls. When I reached Clearwater Cove, the town looked frozen in another time. Small wooden houses with peeling paint, a single diner by the pier, and a faded sign that read, "Welcome to Clearwater, where the sea remembers." I parked near the docks and stepped out. The air smelled of salt and pine, and the wind carried a strange chill despite the sunlight. The coordinates led to a narrow dirt path that disappeared into the trees beyond the main road. I followed it for almost 20 minutes until I came to a rusted gate. On the other side stood an old house. 2 stories, windows boarded up, roof half collapsed. It looked abandoned, yet something about it felt alive, as if the place itself was holding its breath. A faded plaque hung near the door. It read, "Property of Hale Maritime Holdings." My pulse quickened. The same name from the letter. My real father's company. The door creaked open when I pushed it. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of the sea. Sunlight spilled through broken shutters, illuminating a living room filled with relics of another life. An old compass on the mantel. Shipping logs stacked on a desk. A painting of a cargo ship sailing through a storm. On the table, under a sheet of glass, lay another envelope. It was newer than the rest, and it had my name written on it again. This time in bold ink. There was also a note beside it. "If you've made it this far, you're ready." I opened the envelope and found a single photograph inside. It showed a man standing on a dock beside a massive ship, his arm around a woman I instantly recognized. My mother. The man's features mirrored mine. Same eyes, same jawline. Behind them, the ship's name was visible. The Meridian Star. On the back of the photo, a message was scrawled in pen. "Find the captain's ledger." I searched the house for hours. Every creak of the floorboards made me flinch. Every gust of wind through the broken glass sent a shiver down my spine. Finally, in what used to be an office, I found a locked chest beneath a pile of rotting books. It took nearly half an hour to pry it open, but when I did, I found it. A thick, leather-bound book marked Captain's Ledger, Meridian Star. The pages were fragile, filled with detailed entries of shipping routes, cargo manifests, and financial notes. But near the back, I found something different. One page had been carefully sealed with tape, as if someone wanted it hidden but not destroyed. I peeled it open slowly. Inside was a handwritten entry dated 31 years ago. Transfer complete. Project Solace is now secured under Hale Maritime Holdings. Assets moved offshore. Only Richard Hale and one trustee know the true location. Below that line was a strange notation. Vault 19, Kestrel Point. I had no idea what Project Solace meant, but the name Kestrel Point stirred something. I checked my phone's map again. It was another coastal landmark only 20 miles from Clearwater. There was nothing there now but a decommissioned shipyard, according to the map. I closed the ledger, my mind racing. Every clue pulled me deeper into a world that felt like it belonged to someone else, someone powerful, secretive, and now gone. My mother must have known all of this. She must have carried this weight for years, waiting for the right moment to pass it on. That night, I stayed in a small inn near the water. I barely slept. Waves crashed in the distance, steady and relentless like they were calling to me. Before dawn, I packed up again and drove toward Kestrel Point. The road narrowed into gravel, lined with rusted fences and crumbling docks. Seagulls wheeled above, crying into the wind. At the entrance to the old shipyard, a weathered sign leaned to one side. Property condemned. Do not enter. But the padlock on the gate was already broken. I stepped through and followed the trail toward a large storage hangar near the water's edge. The building groaned with every gust of wind. Inside, shafts of light cut through the gaps in the roof, illuminating rows of forgotten crates and tools. And there, near the far wall, was a rusted metal door with a faded stencil above it. Vault 19. For a moment, I just stood there, heart pounding. It felt like the world had narrowed to that single door. I reached out and turned the handle. It was stiff but not locked. The hinges screamed as the door opened, revealing a narrow stairwell descending into darkness. The smell of salt and iron hit me immediately. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The steps led down into what looked like a bunker. The walls were lined with steel cabinets, and in the center of the room stood a reinforced safe. On the front, engraved in tarnished brass, was the same circular compass symbol from the first box I'd found in the locker. I approached it slowly. The combination wheel was rusted, but still functional. I hesitated, then remembered the letter, the line that said, "He left you a choice." And then it clicked. My birthday. My mother had mentioned that in the second letter, back at the bank. I entered the numbers. The safe clicked open. Inside was a single briefcase, perfectly preserved. I lifted it onto a nearby table and unlatched it. Documents. Dozens of them. Deeds, ownership records, financial transfers, all under the name Hale Maritime Holdings. But at the bottom, beneath a layer of sealed envelopes, was one last letter, marked with my name in that same handwriting I knew too well. Son, if you've come this far, then the world you thought you knew has already changed. The fortune your father built wasn't meant to vanish. It was meant to be protected. Those who once controlled it will come looking when they realize you've opened this vault. Trust no one. You are the rightful heir, but the inheritance is more than money. It is power, and power always draws shadows. The words burned into me. My hands trembled as I read them again. Outside, thunder rolled over the sea. I didn't yet understand what I'd uncovered, but deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The morning after I opened the vault, I sat in my truck staring at the waves crashing against the dock. My mind kept looping through every word of that letter. The inheritance is more than money. It is power, and power always draws shadows. What did that mean? Was this just about the fortune, or something much bigger? I had never wanted power. All I'd ever wanted was to feel like my life meant something. But now, every instinct in me said that I was standing on the edge of a story that went far deeper than I could imagine. I decided to return to town before anyone noticed the open vault. The storm from the night before had left the roads slick, and fog clung to the trees as if the forest was trying to hide what I had done. When I stopped at the small diner in Clearwater for coffee, I noticed a man at the counter glancing at me more than once. He wore a leather jacket, his hair slicked back, eyes hidden behind dark glasses. He didn't eat, just stirred his cup over and over. When I paid and walked out, I caught a reflection in the window. He had turned to watch me leave. By the time I reached my truck, my gut was tight. The letter had warned me that people would come looking, and suddenly I believed it. I drove back toward the inn to grab my bag, but halfway there I saw a black SUV in my rearview mirror. It stayed behind me through every turn. Not close enough to be obvious, but never far enough to disappear. I pulled into the gravel lot by the gas station, pretending to check my tires. The SUV slowed, then parked across the street. Two silhouettes sat inside. I knew I couldn't stay in town. I went straight to the pier and rented a small fishing boat from an old man who didn't ask questions. The waves were rough, but I followed the map on my phone toward a small island barely visible on the horizon. It wasn't even marked by name, just a narrow strip of green surrounded by deep blue water. The coordinates written at the bottom of my father's ledger matched its exact location. As the island drew closer, I could see the remains of a dock, half collapsed, and what looked like an old signal tower rising from the trees. When I stepped onto the sand, the air was thick with the scent of salt and rust. The island was silent except for the wind, yet something about it felt familiar, almost like déjà vu. I followed a trail of broken planks inland until I reached the tower. At the base, there was a metal hatch half buried in sand. I brushed it clean and saw a keypad, its surface corroded but intact. I tried the same code I'd used in the vault. The light blinked green. The hatch unlocked with a low hiss. A narrow staircase spiraled downward, carved into stone. My phone flashlight flickered as I descended, illuminating faint symbols etched into the walls. Circles, compasses, and a repeated phrase scratched by hand, "The sea keeps what man forgets." I didn't know what it meant, but it sent a chill through me. At the bottom, I found another chamber, larger than I expected. In the center was a table covered in dust and metal containers. On one of them, I saw an embossed seal, Hale Maritime Holdings. Beside it lay a folder stamped Project Solace. The moment I touched it, I understood. The project my father had hidden wasn't just financial. Inside were blueprints, letters, and coded transmissions dated decades ago. They spoke about offshore accounts, private research vessels, and something called the Meridian Reserve. The more I read, the more it became clear. My father had created a secret division within his company that operated outside any government oversight. It wasn't illegal on paper, but it was powerful. Too powerful. The kind of power corporations and nations fought over quietly. Then I found a photograph clipped inside the file. My father stood beside a younger man in a suit, the same symbol pinned on his lapel. Behind them was a banner that read, Hale Maritime, Future of Energy. But written in pen across the back was something else. Trust no one from the board. Only Hart. The name sent a shock through me. When I was a child, my mother used to mention a man named Henry Hart, one of my father's closest friends. She said he disappeared after my father's death, and that was the moment everything changed. If he was still alive, he might be the key to understanding why my mother had hidden all this. Before I could think further, I heard a sound, footsteps echoing down the stairs. I froze. The light flickered again. Voices drifted through the tunnel. Two men moving fast, their tone sharp and military. I grabbed the folder and ducked behind a row of metal barrels. My heart hammered as they entered the chamber. "There's fresh footprints," one said. "He's been here." I recognized that voice, the man from the diner. They scanned the room with flashlights, their beams cutting through the dust. My breath came shallow, controlled. One of them stepped closer to the table, picked up an empty envelope, and swore under his breath. "He found it," the other replied. "We call the board. If he's open solace, they'll want him alive. For now. Alive for now." The words sank like ice. As soon as they turned toward the stairs, I moved. Quiet, fast, gripping the folder tight. I slipped out through a side passage that led to another tunnel. The air was colder there, damp and heavy. It opened onto a narrow path leading straight to the other side of the island. I could see my boat faintly through the mist. I sprinted across the rocks, ignoring the pain in my legs. Behind me, shouts echoed as the men realized I was gone. I jumped into the boat, pulled the starter cord, and prayed the old engine would turn over. It coughed twice before roaring to life. The island grew smaller in the distance as I raced back toward the mainland. The folder pressed to my chest. When I finally reached Clearwater's shore, the sun was setting, painting the water in shades of fire and blood. I drove until I reached a motel 2 towns over. In that dimly lit room, I opened the folder again. One of the documents had an address written on it. Hart Holdings, Private Office, 917 Harbor Street. Beneath it, a date, tomorrow. He was still alive, and he wanted to meet. I stared at that address for a long time, feeling the storm inside me shift from fear to purpose. Whoever these people were, whatever game my father had played, I was done being the pawn. The shadows were coming for me, but this time I would face them head on. By the time I reached Harbor Street the next morning, fog blanketed the whole bay. The town was barely awake. Fishermen moved like ghosts near the water, their voices muffled by the mist. The address led me to an old 2-story brick building tucked between a coffee shop and a shuttered antiques store. The windows were dusty, the sign above the door faded. H. Hart and Associates. For a moment I wondered if I'd made a mistake, but the same compass symbol from my father's letters was etched into the glass. Inside, the air smelled faintly of tobacco and sea salt. A bell jingled as I stepped in. The front office was quiet except for the ticking of an old clock on the wall. I called out, but no one answered. Then, from the back room came the slow creak of a door. A tall man emerged, leaning on a cane. His hair was silver now, but his posture carried the same quiet authority my mother used to describe when she talked about Henry Hart. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking. I was wondering how long it would take. "You defined me," he said. "You're Henry Hart?" He nodded, eyes sharp despite the wrinkles that framed them. "You look just like your father did when we started Hale Maritime." My pulse quickened. "Then you know why I'm here." He motioned toward a chair. "Sit. There's a great deal you need to understand, and not much time before they realize where you've gone." I sat across from him as he lit a cigarette, the smoke curling between us. "Richard Hale wasn't just a shipping magnate," he said quietly. "He built something larger, an independent logistics network that governments relied on but could never control. Project Solace was his way of protecting it from corruption. When he died, the board tried to seize it. Your mother and I made sure they couldn't. So that's what all this is about? Money." Hart's gaze hardened. "Not just money. Influence. Information. Your father discovered that his company was being used to smuggle more than goods. People, technology, even weapons. He shut it down, but the ones behind it didn't forgive him. That's why he hid the assets and left everything to you. You were his clean slate." The words hit me like a wave. I thought about my mother keeping all those secrets, the fear in her handwriting when she warned me about people watching the account. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. Hart leaned forward. "When your mother died, I went underground. They thought I was gone too, but I kept watch. I've seen the men who came for you in Clearwater. They're not freelance. They're hired by a man named Victor Crane, the same man who once sat on Hale Maritime's board. The name twisted something in my memory. I had seen it once in the company files from the vault. Next to it were dozens of offshore transactions. "He's after Project Solace?" I asked. Hart nodded. "He wants the technology your father created. The data system that could track global shipments in real time. In the right hands, it's worth billions. In the wrong hands, it could rewrite economies." I exhaled slowly. "And what do you want from me?" Hart stubbed out his cigarette. "To finish what your father started. But first, you need to see something." He stood, motioning me to follow him through a back corridor lined with nautical charts and faded photos. He stopped at a steel door secured by a biometric lock. With a quick scan of his thumb, the door opened to reveal a small room glowing with soft blue light. Inside stood several old computer servers, their fans humming faintly. "This," Hart said, "is the last surviving copy of Solace's original network. Your father stored its core here before the company went public. The others think it was destroyed. That's what kept you safe all these years." He opened a drawer and pulled out a small flash drive encased in glass. "Everything, the system, the offshore assets, the control codes, can be restored with this. But once you activate it, there's no going back. Crane will know. They all will." I stared at the drive. My reflection shimmered in the glass like a stranger's face. "Why didn't you destroy it?" I asked. "Because your father believed one day the right person would finish his work," he said simply. "And I believe he was talking about you." A noise outside interrupted us, the sharp sound of tires screeching. Hart's head snapped toward the window. "They found us." He moved quickly, handing me the glass case. "Go out the back. Take the alley to the docks. There's a fishing trawler there called the Mariner. Tell the captain Hart sent you. What about you?" I asked. He gave a faint smile. "My time's already borrowed." "Yours isn't. Now go." Before I could argue, the front door exploded open. The crash echoed through the halls. Voices shouted, 3, maybe 4 men. I turned and ran. The hallway blurred around me as adrenaline took over. I shoved through the rear door into the cold morning air. Behind me, I heard Hart shouting something, followed by a gunshot. The alley twisted behind the row of buildings, narrow and slick from the mist. I sprinted toward the sound of seagulls and waves. At the docks, a rusted fishing vessel bobbed in the tide. A man in a raincoat looked up from his ropes as I approached. "Are you the captain of the Mariner?" I gasped. He frowned. "Who's asking?" "Henry Hart sent me." That was all it took. His expression changed instantly. He waved me aboard. "Get below deck, now." The boat lurched as we pulled away from the pier. I glanced back just in time to see black SUVs screeching to a stop near the wharf. Figures spilled out, shouting orders, scanning the docks with weapons drawn. One of them raised a radio. "They'll be on us soon," the captain said, throttling the engine. Hart always said this day would come. We sailed through the fog, the coastline fading into gray nothingness. I sat in the cramped cabin, clutching the glass case, my heart still racing from what I'd seen. Somewhere behind us, the man who had saved my life was probably gone. Hours later, when the sky began to clear, the captain turned to me. He told me if you ever came, I should take you to the Northern Ridge. There's a safe house there. From what I know, it's where your father hid before the end. I looked out over the waves. The sea was calm now, almost peaceful. For the first time since this began, I realized I wasn't running anymore. I was being led somewhere. Maybe by fate. Maybe by the ghosts of the past. But either way, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever my father had left behind wasn't meant to stay buried. We reached the Northern Ridge just as dawn began to bleed across the horizon. The cliffs there were tall and jagged, the kind that seemed to rise straight out of the sea. The captain pointed toward a narrow path that wound up through the rocks and handed me a small backpack with food, water, and a radio. "Follow that trail until you see the stone arch," he said. "The house is behind it. After that, you're on your own." He didn't wait for thanks. The moment I stepped off the boat, he turned the vessel back into the mist and was gone. The climb was steep and cold. Every gust of wind carried salt from the waves below, biting into my skin. Halfway up, I stopped to catch my breath and looked back. The ocean stretched out endlessly, its surface glimmering in pale gold. Somewhere beyond that horizon were the people who had chased me, the men who had killed Henry Hart, and the empire my father had left behind. I wasn't sure if I was walking toward salvation or a trap, but I couldn't turn back now. The trail finally leveled out near the top of the ridge. The stone arch came into view, massive, weathered, and covered in moss. Beyond it stood a small cabin built from dark timber, half hidden among the pines. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney, though the air was still. Someone had been there recently. I approached slowly, every sense alert. The door was unlocked, creaking slightly as I pushed it open. Inside, the place was simple but tidy. A single desk by the window, shelves lined with old books, a wood stove still warm, and, on the table, a sealed envelope with my name written across it in my father's familiar handwriting. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My throat tightened, my hands trembling as I picked up the letter. The paper was yellowed, but the ink was strong, the words deliberate and clear. "My son," it began. "If you found this place, then you followed the same path I once walked. I never wanted this legacy to fall on your shoulders, but the world doesn't give us what we want. It gives us what we're meant to carry. You've already seen what power does to men like Crane. That is why Solace must never fall into their hands." I sat down slowly, my eyes tracing every line. The truth is, the letter continued, Solace was never about money or control. It was about freedom. I built a system that could bypass borders, expose corruption, and give the powerless a voice. But the board saw profit where I saw justice. When I refused to sell, they came for me. Hart helped me vanish. Your mother helped me protect you. Tears blurred my vision. If you choose to continue my work, you will have to sacrifice the life you knew. You'll be hunted, tested, and doubted. But if you succeed, you'll change everything. The access key is hidden beneath the floorboards. Use it wisely, and never trust anyone who claims to act in your name. I folded the letter and stared at the floor. My father's words echoed through me like the rhythm of the sea. Beneath the desk, a small section of wood looked newer than the rest. I pried it open carefully and found a metal lockbox. Inside was a single device, an old satellite transmitter, and a note taped to its surface. Solace node access. Active. I turned it on. The screen flickered to life, lines of code cascading like falling rain. Then a prompt appeared. Input verification code. I remembered the coordinates from the first letter, the numbers my mother had left me. I entered them. The terminal blinked twice, then displayed a message. Network restored. Solace is live. The room filled with a low hum as the transmitter synced with some unseen system. A holographic map projected above the table, filled with hundreds of glowing points scattered across the globe. Every point represented a server, a connection, a hidden network my father had built to expose the powerful who thought they ruled unseen. I watched as encrypted data began flowing through the grid, messages flashing in languages from every continent. It was real. Everything he had created had survived, and now it was mine. But even as awe filled me, another sound broke the silence, the faint crunch of footsteps outside. I turned off the device, heart pounding, and ducked toward the window. Through the glass, I saw movement between the trees. Two men in dark coats, rifles slung over their shoulders, moving in deliberate formation. They had found me again. I grabbed the transmitter, stuffed it into my bag, and slipped out the back door. The forest was dense and uneven, the air heavy with the scent of pine and sea spray. I moved fast, staying low, every crack of a branch behind me tightening my chest. When I reached the edge of the ridge, I could see the ocean below. A steep drop, the waves crashing against the rocks like thunder. The men shouted behind me. I didn't think. I just ran. Bullets tore through the air, splintering bark around me. I dove, sliding down the slope toward the cliffs. My hands burned against the gravel as I fought to stay upright. Then, just ahead, I saw a narrow crevice between two rocks leading to a hidden outcrop. I slipped inside, breathing hard, clutching the bag against me. Minutes passed. The voices above grew distant, then faded entirely. Only the sound of the waves remained. When I finally climbed out, the sky was bleeding orange and red. The sun had risen fully, lighting the sea with fire. I walked along the shore until I found a small cave at the base of the cliff. Inside, I set down the bag and powered on the transmitter again. The map reappeared, pulsing brighter than before. A new message flashed across the screen. Node 1 active. Welcome, Administrator Hale. I stared at the words, realizing what they meant. My father's system recognized me, not as an intruder, but as its rightful heir. Solace wasn't just a weapon or a company asset. It was a network built to reveal truth, to uncover what men like Crane wanted buried. The weight of it settled over me like the tide. I could destroy it and disappear forever, or I could carry it forward. Every instinct screamed that it was dangerous, but somewhere deep inside, a voice that sounded like my father's whispered, "You already know what you must do." I pressed one final command on the screen. Activate Global Stream. The map came alive, lines of data linking across oceans and continents. For the first time in decades, the truth my father died for began to surface. Names, accounts, and hidden transactions flooding into public view. The men who had hunted us would soon be hunted by their own secrets. As the cave filled with the glow of the transmitter, I looked out toward the horizon. The wind carried the scent of the sea, the same one my father had known all his life. I felt no triumph, only peace. He had left me a choice, and I had made it. The sea keeps what man forgets. But sometimes it returns what the world needs to remember.